So I want to thank everyone for joining me today. My name's Daniel Harvey. Hello. I'm at a company called Sapient Nitro, which, if you guys don't know, is very large sort of marketing services consultancy. And we've made a lot of big bets recently on artificial intelligence and chatbots and the like. So I want to talk a little bit about that space, given that the sort of broader framework for the conference was around how do we design for the future today. So thank you. I think if we roll back, maybe not our memories, but maybe our history a little bit, the command line interface was the interface du jour for about 20 years, from the 1960s to the 1980s. It hasn't gone anywhere. That's the lovely thing about what we do. Despite people sort of thinking that technologies or things get antiquated, they don't. They just sort of become quiet. And what's happened is, I think with the command line, it might seem like gobbledygook to people that aren't familiar with it. But it's basically an early example of language as an interface. And so if you knew the right syntax and the right grammar, you could use it to get a very precise and powerful response from the machine. And then obviously, the 80s sort of roll around. Apple introduces Lisa. We're suddenly in the realm of commercially available graphical user interfaces. I'm going to skip over that now. We're all well and truly familiar with that. But I think this sentiment is something that's worth carrying over as we start to look into today and the near future around voice interfaces and voice assistants. And again, language is the primary thing here, just like the command line before it, except this time you don't need to have a computer science degree to pull it off. A show of hands of people that have used Alexa. It's kind of impressive, right? I mean, everyone that has used it agree? Yeah? The syntax and the grammar of it is something that you can sort of pick up pretty quickly. And they're sort of building robust skills, they call them, so that you can do more things with the service. I think before we get to the point where everything is connected to the internet and we're talking to all of our devices, we're going to go through a period where we're going to be typing to sort of non-embodied things, so a lot of chat conversations and the like. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that. That's not a bearded egg. That is Mark. I can't get over how egg-shaped his head is. It distracted me when I was pulling together the presentation. But Andreessen is obviously a famous venture capitalist. And in 2011, in an article, an interview in the Wall Street Journal, he basically said that software is eating the world. We've all heard that statement as a result, but I think it's safe to say that today, a few years later, it's certainly proven to be true, right? Software is ubiquitous, it's everywhere, it's eating hardware's lunch left, right, and center. But I think it's also fair to say that not all software is created equal. You're seeing today that messaging apps and messaging services are having a meteoric rise, much more than any other space. 2014, Flurry is a mobile analytics company, and they sort of shared some data that year-over-year performance of chat app sessions grew by about 103%. That's been a sort of steady, sustained growth since then. I think we're also seeing interesting phenomenon, not just at a sort of meta level, but in particular apps. So WhatsApp, in and of itself, has had 50% more volume than all global SMS. And that's phenomenal. I think. Snapchat, which was once upon a time just the darling of millennials, and graybeards like me were not allowed anywhere near it. They now have 100 million daily average users. That's a pretty impressive number as well. And then I think if you look at the most downloaded apps in the UK, the top 4 are all chat or messenger apps. Half of that are all from Facebook, right? So WhatsApp, Messenger. But those top 4 chat experiences have 3 billion monthly average users, which is 500 million more than the top 4 social networks. So we're all sort of congregating to these experiences. And it's not just that it's all social chatter. Some of the more robust chat experiences and platforms are providing all sorts of different functions. So I think if you look to the east and look at WeChat, they had more mobile payment transactions for the 2016 Chinese New Year alone than PayPal had in the entirety of 2015, which is why you're seeing WeChat rake in money hand over fist. I think, how many people use Slack? Are you in it 10 hours a day? That's an astronomical number to me. But, and that's an enterprise app, right? That's not you and me shooting the shit together. That's like work, and that's like serious business, and that's why they have such an impressive valuation. I think that level of engagement is really unprecedented in that space. But I think more importantly, it's this evolution of messaging platforms and the rise of these sort of chatbot experiences within them that really represent a shift in this sort of always-on world that we live in today. And I think it's something that's very critical that businesses understand this mega trend and respond in short order. I think in some respects what we're really looking at is the dawn of the post-app era. And that's something that we have to be mindful of, and I think is going to be as transformational for businesses and consumers as the App Store were about a decade ago. I think, historically, companies that create operating systems have always had a bit of an advantage. So if you roll back to the personal computer era, Microsoft, with its dominance via Windows, certainly stood out. I think if you move over to the desktop sort of internet era, Google was often kind of considered the operating system of the web. It's certainly the front door of the web for many of us. In the mobile era, Apple's iOS and Android are obviously key parts of important ecosystems for both Apple and Google. But I think what we're starting to see now as we move from that sort of mobile era into the cloud era, that's all up for grabs, and that's changing yet again. And what's important to realize is that these messaging platforms really are sort of becoming stealth operating systems that live on top of our normal operating systems. And they're infiltrating our life through the notification panel day after day. I think one of the things that's interesting about a lot of the more successful platforms out there is that whether it's WeChat or Facebook Messenger, they're facilitating more than just chat, right? So it's peer-to-peer payments, it's shopping, it's booking transport, it's booking tables at restaurants, and more. So WeChat has a very robust sort of feature set, but Facebook Messenger is also tackling a lot of those issues and opportunities as well. And who knows what else is going to come down the road within that platform as they sort of continue to refine the AI that's involved. But I think as these messaging apps grow more powerful, the need for standalone apps becomes something that we have to really sort of consider, right? So, out of all of those functions that I just mentioned, you can think of impact on Venmo, Jet, Halo, OpenTable, and others. But then also it's worth considering the impact on some of the on the vehicles that are providing those services as well. So what's going to happen to Google Now as it takes in even more sort of feature sets? What happens to Cortana, Siri, et cetera? But even above and beyond that, what happens to the rest of all the other apps out there? Show of hands of people that have downloaded a new app this month. Anyone? We're all rare. The average user downloads 0 apps a month. So I think if you take that into account, and if you take into account this sort of sea change that I'm talking about, things can start to look pretty bleak for traditional apps. So I think that's all interesting, but I think it's worth sort of digging under the surface a little bit and figuring out why people are starting to prefer this sort of chat UI paradigm. First, there's this similarity across the user interfaces. You've got some text on the left, you've got some text on the right, you've got a sort of input interface on the bottom, and so it's familiar. All sort of chat experiences are fundamentally the same. They have that sort of dominant pattern. And that's led some people to sort of call them zero learning curve UIs. So it's second nature to us now. And so as Nir Eyal, author of Hooked, says, we already know how to chat, so making requests is easy. Secondly, I think what's interesting about chat is that things can be either instantaneous if you need it, or asynchronous if you don't. So if you're in a situation where you're trying to find a bus or a train schedule, then fire up a bot and get that pretty quickly. Citymapper, for example, is pretty fantastic. But just as powerful are things like Google Now, et cetera. But if you need something that can take a little bit of time, like if you're trying to find a really awesome Mexican wrestler's mask, for example, then a service like Magic or Fetch Me here in the UK can do that and sort of take the time to provide you with a good deal. But I think, unlike the telephone or the web, messaging really affords us this opportunity of constant communication. So we can give customers quick access to information. We can grant them answers, even when brand representatives might not be available, right? So no one has to worry about a bot working 24 hours, 7 days a week, right? There's no labor union for the bots yet. And I think that's really all best summed up in this quote from Ben Thompson, who, if you guys aren't familiar, is a really terrific tech strategist. Encourage you guys to read his blog, Stratechery, as often as you can. But really, he says that conversations are never ending, and they come and go at a pace dictated not by physicality, but rather by attention. And that sort of attention economy is something that's also part and parcel of this paradigm shift that we're seeing. The third big reason why I think they're sort of taking off is that they're an ideal medium for customer service. How many people have been so impressed with a brand or an experience that you've sort of written positive reviews in social media about them? Okay. Now, show of hands of people that have been so pissed off at a brand that they've taken to social media to really give them a what for. Right. So if social media has taught us anything, it's that people love to fucking complain. And that's important, that's valid. It's a totally legitimate experience to have, particularly when only 8% of the companies we deal with actually give us superior customer experience. But I think it's interesting from a chat perspective in that those sort of damaging conversations are in a sort of largely encrypted channel, right? So you're not seeing that sort of, there's a chance to sort of contain some of those more destructive comments to an intimate setting. And I think lastly, messaging apps could very well end up being the last great refuge for privacy. Telegram is a great service, and they've been lauded by privacy advocates for their encryption by and large. ISIS swears by it. A weird endorsement, but there you go. But even more, encryption is becoming the default, right? So WhatsApp has recently set that as a standard as well and followed that. And you're seeing this sort of tug and war between Apple and the FBI right now in a sort of 21st century version of the crypto wars around this topic. And here in the UK with the Snoopers Charter, we could very well see a similar thing play out. So it's something to keep in mind as well. Brands have always fished where the fish are, and because of this sort of swelling of engagement that we've seen in the chat space, you're seeing more and more experimentation happen in that space. So Messenger, for example, has a number of successful brand integrations now with Uber, for example, to reserve a car, but also KLM to double check your boarding pass, get flight information updates, et cetera. So it's very much the case where you can actually live in just Messenger and get everything done that you need to do, which is pretty terrifying and powerful sentiment at the same time. But those sort of big companies, Google, Facebook, they're not the only guys in the mix, right? So Kik, is anyone familiar with Kik? Not surprising because it's sort of a millennial-focused thing. So Snapchat sort of seeded that ground to Kik. It's big on sort of university campuses in the States. And they've done a lot of, they were one of the first sort of messenger platforms to have a bot store. And they've had bots created for brands like MTV, The Washington Post, Skull Candy, and a few others. Their sort of most successful bot campaign was for NBC Universal for Insidious 3, a movie I've never seen, but basically you could chat to the main character. It's a sort of typical haunted house type movie, I think, but that main character, Quinn, exchanged over 69 messages across nearly 350,000 participants. So that's a lot of scripting, a lot of sort of careful writing had to go into that. Snapchat obviously is sort of integrated with a lot of different brands as well. And Clark's had worked with WhatsApp to create a couple of different bot characters to help promote their Desert Boot brand. So these sort of integrations and experiments are happening at pace. And I think we can all agree that the discovery experience in the App Store and in Google Play is fucking terrible. And that's in need of a much long overdue overhaul. But there are these sort of emergence of the bot store. Skype has launched their own bot store. Kik had them. Both of those go back to like 2015. At the last Fate conference, Zuckerberg got on stage and sort of talked about how Facebook would enter into the bot store environment. They're not quite there yet, but they're still surfacing a few standout examples here and there. And out of their sort of dominant examples, it's largely around media and commerce. So CNN, 1-800-Flowers, they're all sort of part of that sort of early store environment for Facebook. And given that we have like 900, I think it's like 900 million people per month are using Facebook Messenger, that platform will sort of become the first experience that a lot of people have with bots. But more than that, the tech community, particularly in Silicon Valley and here in the UK, are interested in chatbots largely because they're a Trojan horse for AI, right? They're an opportunity to test weak artificial intelligences, specific artificial intelligences at scale. And that sort of model of sort of general purpose, strong, or specific purpose, weak artificial intelligences is something that you'll encounter a lot in conversation with people. General purpose AI is the kind of stuff where you could ask it any question and it'll give you the right answer. We're not there yet. By a country mile, we're not there yet. But these sort of slivers, these experiences that I've talked about are good examples of sort of specific AI. And a lot of the bots that we do have today are a combination of algorithms, humans behind the scenes, or hybrids of the two. So Google Now, Google Assistant, those are largely algorithmically driven. Facebook M is a kind of hybrid between humans and algorithms. And again, services like Magic or Fetch Me are human Turks behind the scenes, sort of doing all the hard work. I think we're all sort of largely concerned about how tedious a sort of chatbot experience could be. The last thing we need is to have an IVR system in our pockets providing terrible experiences, which is why you're seeing this sort of complement start to happen in those platforms where it's sort of zero learning curve plus. So rather than having to ask every question, which could get tedious, you're seeing services complement that with card-like experiences or even sort of micro apps. And I think the other thing that's important around these sort of very specific AI instances is that they help contain the question set so that you don't have that risk of getting a sort of non-answer. So if you've got, a Facebook bot for your bank, to ask it about sort of mortgages or savings or retirement. You wouldn't ask it for football or the weather. And that's why brands can be sort of valuable in this space, because they can help constrain the conversation. I think it's possible to see how you could easily imagine deeper connections between brands as a result of these types of experiences. So a ton of people use, show of hands perhaps, of people that use any sort of fitness tracking experiences, Nike Plus, Moves, that sort of thing. It's easy to imagine how with the integration of chat or conversational UI, that some of those trackers could turn into virtual personal trainers. And I think that'll be an interesting thing to start to see develop over time. And again, it's that sort of specificity around the brand experience, around the activity, that can help really strengthen AI as we move forward. More importantly than that, from where we sit as designers, is that the brand voice matters more than ever. The requirements of designing a successful chat experience are fundamentally different. They have a lot in common, but they're still fundamentally different from building websites or delivering apps. So figuring out the personality of your brand really becomes key. So is your brand voice funny? Is it smart? Is it authoritative? And how's the bot going to behave when a customer does ask it an unrelated question? These are all things that we've sort of asked ourselves in the past as designers, but they're really becoming very prominent today as we move forward. A gentleman by the name of John Palvis, recently said that when the conversation is the interface, experience design is all about crafting the right words. So it's time to start thinking like writers. Information architecture, it's great that Lou's here in the front, is obviously sort of having a bit of a rebirth as well, because it's about sort of logic trees and flows and sequences. But a lot of companies that are in this space are hiring writers first and foremost before they're hiring UX people or visual designers. And they're looking for people with theater backgrounds, with improv backgrounds, And that's not just companies like the one Palvis is with, which is a company called X.AI, who create these sort of personal assistants, Amy and Andrew, if you guys have ever used those services. But Google, when it created its virtual assistant, pilfered writers from Pixar and The Onion. So we've got to start thinking about storytelling, narrative, and conversation a lot more than perhaps we've been encouraged to do in the past. And avoiding those sort of rhetorical questions is part of a sort of good emerging best practice, but also building in kill switches, something that's often recommended. So if Amy or Andrew starts to get a little too chatty with you, you can actually tell them, shut the fuck up, and it'll know to back off and sort of leave you alone. So as I start to wrap up, this is Benedict Evans. He's another venture capitalist at Andreessen Horowitz, and he sort of has a retort to what his boss, Marc, said 5-6 years ago. And he says, it used to be that all software expanded until it included messaging. Now all messaging expands until it includes software. I think, again, that's a very succinct way to sort of talk about that paradigm shift. And as with any new era, there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of sort of early adoption from sort of bold brands. But all of those things, if you sort of pay attention to them, are teaching us a lot about what's around the corner. And I think the rise of chat gives us, as marketers, as designers, et cetera, this unparalleled opportunity to align what a brand does and what a brand says perhaps more strongly than ever before. So the right chat strategy, when executed well, can merge a brand's persona with consumer expectations to create seamless and intuitive experiences, something that we've always talked about a lot as designers. And whether that means sort of adding chat functions to your existing apps or creating branded bots on these sort of bigger platforms, organizations now can have more personalized conversations with their consumers than ever before. So, thank you.
Such a delightful talk. I'd like to ask a question.
Charlie.
Yeah, thank you. Sort of related to your point about how businesses need to adapt their self-service strategies and how they employ chatbots. Can you see a day when in an organisation you have a head of chat position?
Maybe not chat, but certainly head of AI. And Apple's just hired their first, so not surprising. We're seeing a number of our clients start to ask if that is something they should do. So, right around the corner.
Is the technology driving this going to be IBM Watson, or is there something new, or what do you think is going to be, especially for the designer space, what they're going to be using to implement all this?
Sure, there are actually a number of platforms out there. So, and they've all sort of got different roles to play. But Watson is certainly very strong and has a lot of sort of media attention and focus around it. Here at Sapient Nitro, we work with a company called Nomensa. And what's great about being here in the UK is this is sort of ground zero for a lot of that sort of AI platform development. So DeepMind, for example, a lot of companies in and around Cambridge.
Thank you. Hi. How receptive are the older generations to chat interfaces?
It's a great question. I don't have any particular data around that. But what is interesting is if you look at those sort of monthly and daily average user figures I shared, that's well above and beyond those sort of initial seeds that happened with a lot of these experiences around millennial audiences. So they're graying, if not gray yet. So.
Great. Right, we're going to break for coffee. We're going to get down and then we're going to